In February this year, government signed an agreement with authorities in Saudi Arabia to ensure the rights and safety of Ugandan migrant workers. This was to enforce the employment regulations of 2021 and also follow on the implementation of the bilateral labor agreement Uganda and Saudi Arabia signed in 2017. The two countries agreed to establish a joint technical committee to monitor implementation and compliance with the 2017 bilateral agreement. The Gender Minister, Betty Amongi, said the monitoring committee would be set up by June this year. She told the media that over 140,000 Ugandan migrant workers were in Saudi Arabia, and their remittances to Uganda's economy were about $900 million. That makes the Ugandans in Cheyo, in Saudi Arabia, a vital industry government is obliged to protect. In the research, it was discovered that the main contractor is usually a foreign licensed company based in Saudi Arabia. This sends job orders to the subcontracted Ugandan agency to look for workers. All powers over the worker actually belongs to Saudi Arabia Recruitment Company and the eventual employer of the girls. Take Judith Nachintu, for example. The 38-year-old single mother of 5 lost her left kidney in Jeddah. Nachintu was recruited by Nile Treasure Gate Company in 2019 to work in Jeddah. Another example is of Millie Namazi, a 26-year-old mother of 2 who died in Egypt after sending several audio recordings that her life was in danger. She was recruited by Dreams Connect Company, which told the family she had died in an accident. Yet police's medical examination report indicates she was murdered instead after torture. Article 3 of the agreement executed on December 27, 2017 between Uganda and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia enjoins parties to protect the rights of domestic workers externalized in line with applicable laws. Actually, Ugandan girls are being sold online and transactions are made between the two companies and employers. Girls in recruitment processes are never involved. They are like commodities waiting to be sold. It is actually easy when you want to go for Cheyo. The adverts are many on radio and many people know some companies or someone who knows some company. Our undercover journalist got this advert on an internet page called Ugandans in UAE. Ewan Jamila Njaka was calling for people interested to travel to Dubai to work as housemates and promising a salary of 1.2 million Uganda shillings. She inquired and was told that if indeed the ad was for Dubai, that was human trafficking, complete with the risk of sex exploitation and forced labor. Jamila gave a contact of another person to meet for more details. When she called that number, the owner introduced herself as Shakira but preferred to be called Narongo. Narongo has a sweet and convincing tongue. She asked our journalist to visit their office in Machindye. She convinced her that the company was genuine. She said there was an immediate opportunity in Saudi Arabia and that she should go with a few clothes, about 2 dresses and 2 packs of pads. She said if showed up the next day, they would be able to travel in 2 weeks. She said the journalist was supposed to stay at a hostel as they finalized the documents. That was their system. However, she did not seem to know a lot about externalization of labor, the treaties, procedures, and government conditions. On Friday early in the morning, she called our undercover journalist again and said they would be setting off to their office in Machindye, asked her to come to office and do medical checks, so to be on the list of those waiting to travel in a few days. She asked them to come with only 2 dresses because after medical, they won't be allowed to go back home because the company doesn't want girls to get pregnant before traveling. Our journalist was in Machinde by 10 a.m. The office is near KCCA offices in a squeezed space without a name. Nalongo told them to stand at the KCCA signpost where she would be picked from. 2 other girls were also waiting in the office with packed bags. She introduced our undercover journalist to Florence Najemba, who she said was her boss. Najemba was registering 2 girls for passports. One of them was from Lugazi and another from Chibuku. The girls pay Najemba for the passports. Yet according to the employment regulations of 2021, a recruitment agency may charge a migrant worker a fee not exceeding 20,000 shillings only for administrative costs only. Florence asked the girl 500,000 to process her a passport. That was illegal. When asked about Dubai, Florence said the advert about Dubai was a mistake, reasoning that they were only taking them to Saudi Arabia at the moment because Dubai was still closed because of COVID-19 lockdown. Florence took all the girls to a clinic across the road called Rift Valley Medical Services Limited for medical tests. They took blood and urine samples. The examinations required were HIV, hepatitis B, syphilis, and HCG tests for pregnancy. While waiting for results, Madame Florence bragged that her girls are doing well and that they were all earning 1.2 million shillings monthly, and some have so far started building here in Uganda. She claimed to monitor them and that no one has ever complained of exploitation. She however explained that if they wanted to go to Dubai, they would pay 4 million shillings and Richard will take it through Nairobi. Richard's office is also tiny. It is located at Mukisa House, behind Hotel Equatoria, opposite Post Bank. Outside the office, there was a mobile money agent called Viola, who seemed to be Richard's worker too, working next to the office entrance. Expected to be driven to a hostel, our undercover journalist hadn't carried extra clothes, but Richard said there was no time. It was as if they were traveling the next day. In the next episode, we take you to shock and horror at the hostel. Vision Group undercover journalist responded to an ad to travel to Dubai for Cheyo. She narrates how the destination changed to Saudi Arabia, the hassle of registration and medical tests. Richard, who was given to them as the in charge of recruitment for Cheyo in Saudi Arabia, introduced them to a man called Mutumba. Mutumba drove them from Mukisa House behind Hotel Equatoria to an unknown destination. Mutumba drove them through town and towards Kulambiro. It was hard not to imagine the worst. Arrived in Kulambiro and stopped at a hostel which didn't have a name. There was no recruitment agency signpost. Inside the gate were many girls whom we later found were about 140 registered inmates of a storied house built for a residential. It was occupying one corner of a 50 by 100 plot, and the rest of the compound was paved. Keeping so many girls in such a squeezed place was utter criminal. Upstairs, the house had a master bedroom. The 2 other bedrooms, all self-contained, and a store, all were used as dormitories, except one room, which was the matron's residence cum store. The other 2 bedrooms acted as offices during the day. One was the boss's office and the other for the rest of his staff. Those who came earlier slept on the few deckers, but the rest were on the floor, in the corridors, and also on the verandas and balcony. All these 140 girls shared 5 restrooms, which were not enough. Many would bathe from outside, but still the hygiene was difficult with so many girls. Some would bathe and leave the herbs and greeny stuff in the bathroom. Others menstrual blood. Girls were using only 2 latrine spaces and 1 bathroom. They were not allowed to use toilets in the house. They only belonged to Arab staff, yet Tuba police was about 100 meters away. The girls were having posho and beans for lunch while seated on the veranda. Majority were old, approximately 25 to 40 years old. They gazed in a suspicious way and no one greeted them. Mutumba led the undercover journalist upstairs to an office where 3 Arabs were. Their leader, Ahmed, happened to be the owner of the recruitment company. Ahmed asked whether the girls made up their mind to work in Saudi Arabia as housemaids. He asked the girls to trust him and his company since he was an Arab in Uganda and not a conman. He said he had plenty of job offers in Saudi. He then gave them contracts to read. The hostel was like a girls' school, only without teachers or leaders. Girls were in groups of friends, making it difficult to reach any. Dinner was served at 8 p.m. It was rice and beans, watery beans, and rice you could easily mistake for posho. Another group of girls was having chips and chicken while sipping on local waraji they allegedly sent through the gatekeeper. No one gave them a hint on where to sleep. The girls asked and referred to Matron Harriet. She was surprised to see them and blamed the agent, Richard, for not telling her on time. She said the only solution was to wait for everyone to sleep so she can identify mattresses and free space. Hygiene was horrible. It was dirty in all corners with leftovers, caveras, used pads and plastics thrown all over, including the kitchen, which was next to the toilet and bathroom. Girls urinated anywhere and everywhere. The whole place was stinking. Girls too smelled sweat and other odors. No wonder water to bathe was scarce and they were given a bedsheet to cover for the night. The water tank would only be opened at 5 a.m. and closed immediately for the cooks to use. They were literally showering once a day. In the night, they would jump over each other to go for short calls. The place had 2 commanders who would sleep at the entrance of the living room. There were bullies who would tease newcomers and weaklings. Every girl feared them. Their word was always final. Even the matron and some of the staff feared them. Eventually, the girls were aggressively placed, but there was only one mattress, which they decided to share. In the morning, they were called to the office by Christine and Leira to fill a form. Our undercover journalist was also supposed to record a video and so was given a long dress and a veil to put on. Leira recorded her pictures and took details of age, marital status, and whether they ever worked abroad as a domestic worker. Our undercover girl arrived on the 16th of August 2021 and the first group of 49 to leave for Saudi Arabia went on October 10th, almost 2 months after she joined the group. The second group of 31 left on October 15th and the third group of 50 on November 9th. One of the girls in the hostel was called Afuswa, not her real names, said she had no passport and was always traveling to the Ministry of Internal Affairs to meet her broker for it. She claimed she had paid him money to get it for her first. This fat lady in her early 40s said she was brought by her agent who promised to get her a passport while in the hostel. With teary eyes, she narrates how she left her village in Mityana. She used to own a restaurant in Mityana town as her source of income before COVID-19 broke out. After many efforts to get a passport and investing a lot of money for it in vain, she was told it was hard for her to get it because she had a nationality connected with Rwanda. In the next episode, we bring you to how the Arab shifted the girls to another place after the neighborhood became suspicious. and anyone caught absent would be expelled and travel papers cancelled. The conditions were bad: loss of freedom, poor feeding, poor hygiene, lack of amenities, and growing frustration was the order of the day. Our undercover journalist got used to tears at the hostel. Everyone had her own story, and girls would break down during the narration. For Mina, her story is sad. This young girl in her mid-20s was married with 3 children back in Busoga. In her narration, her husband was a taxi driver. She was a tailor back in her village. She narrated that after her husband got an accident, she was left responsible for him and the children. The sewing machine could not do much. They both agreed that she goes to Saudi so she could support the family. Her sister linked her to Florence and Richard, who were her agents. She did not have a passport then, so Florence asked her to get 550,000 shillings for the passport. Mina did not have money, but had a plot in Busoga which she had bought 3 million shillings with her mother's support. Because she was promised to start a process and go in 2 weeks, she borrowed 550,000 shillings with a collateral of a plot of land worth 3 million in an agreement that after a month she would return 600,000 shillings when working. Even after being convinced by Florence, she asked her to sell her sewing machine after being convinced how she did not have much time in Uganda. This was common in many girls at the company being told to abandon their businesses by their agents on promise that they would travel in less than 2 weeks. Mina had spent close to 6 months at the hostel. Florence took her money and did not take her on time as promised. The owner of the money took the plot of land because there was an agreement. She lost her plot and almost lost her marriage as the husband could not believe her story. She finally went after a big hassle. It wasn't only Mina with a sad story. Another girl disclosed how she was servicing a bank loan of 1.5 million shillings when her husband abandoned her with 2 children. She decided to take her children to her parents and got recruited in one of the recruitment agencies in Mengo in April last year. Months before she traveled, the company's license was suspended by the ministry and everyone was ordered to go back home. There were no cooks in the hostel. The girls were formed into teams and each had a turn to cook and clean dishes. So food quality was never good because no one was paid for the labor. Food would either be burnt or unready. One time, girls asked the Arab bosses to hire cooks and they overreacted about it, telling them that if they cannot cook here, what would they be going to do in Saudi Arabia? That day, girls almost rioted due to poor food. Our undercover journalist arrived on the 16th of August 2021 and 3 days later, they were told that all would shift to a new place. Rumors came saying the landlord had ordered them to leave after being shocked by the numbers. Ahmed blamed the eviction on the girls. He said some girls had gotten used to the neighborhood and started jumping over the perimeter wall to look for men, alcohol, or escape back home. The girls were only allowed to leave the premises for medical reasons. But according to Matron Harriet, the house belongs to one of the senior lecturers at Makerere University and had rented it for 6 months at 3 million shillings per month. But the landlord discovered the premises were being mismanaged and local leaders were overwhelmed by complaints from neighbors about noise. There was not much to prepare to live with. The girls were ferried away in a mini truck, beds and mattresses. Our undercover journalist was told to stay with another colleague because they had not done medicals. The rest were hurriedly boarded on a mini truck on top of the mattresses while Arabs were driven away. She stayed with Matron Harriet, her daughter Gloria, Christine, and one Arab called Majid, who was sleeping in one of the rooms. To start the process of going, they were then taken for a medical. The Gulf Cooperation Council (GCC) is a medical examination done on migrant workers traveling to work in the 6 Gulf countries of Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates. Abdul Karim, one of the staff, said medical costs $70. You book online and each is allocated to specific hospital. They include Medicare Kampala Diagnostic Center, JB Clinic in Kabalagala, Carlson Medical Services, Medical World, City Medicals, and Geolo in Bugorobi, City Ambulance, among others. Our undercover journalist was sent to Medicare Kampala Diagnostic Center based in Bukoto on Kiro Road on August 24th around 1:15 p.m. When results are out, they were shared online, but girls were told by office because they were not supposed to go back to the hospital. We discovered that some girls failed the medical and were asked for money to have their results changed to good. One of her colleagues, Rahma, confirmed that a nurse at Medicare asked her for money to give her favorable results. That a nurse called them outside and said their blood pressure was high. She demanded for 100,000 shillings to record a good result. They gave her 20,000 shillings and she refused. She told them there was no free service since they were traveling to make money. In the next episode, we bring to you village flights, sex, mega scam, pregnancies, protests, and move to close the hostel. In the last episode, our undercover journalist explained how poor living conditions in the hostel led to Arabs shifting the girls to another hostel. Today, she narrates how mega scam, pregnancies, and protests hit the hostel. Meanwhile, life at the hostel in Tuba Kulambiro was as humbling as it was frustrating. Poor feeding, bad hygiene, and lack of amenities were luring frustrated girls into sex with casual men for money. Although they were supposed to stay clear of pregnancies, STDs, and HIV, the place turned into some brothel very fast. Neighbors and LCs petitioned police, who put up pressure to have the hostel closed. The administrators, Agnes Nangendo, Ashraf Kaiwa, Rosette, and Christine, ordered those who had no passports or had not done medical to go home. They also asked those who had fully registered and were staying nearby to go back home and wait for a phone call. The hostel conditions were horrible, but you should have seen how girls pleaded to stay. Some said they had run away from their husbands, others said they had bank loans and feared to be arrested, and others still that they had sold their homes. Where did these people expect them to return to? Even as the administrators wanted to decrease the hostel population, agents were bringing in girls. Our undercover journalist tried to inquire where the company gets all the money to feed the girls and was told it is sent by the owner of the recruitment company back in Saudi Arabia, which was responsible for gathering them. His name was said to be Rahid. He is believed to be the owner of Zion Worldwide Placements Limited. Ahmed, who had become a friend to our undercover journalist, revealed that the random number of the girls in the hostel was also frustrating him, that he was failing to get the quantity of food needed to support them, that he would wait until his boss in Saudi Arabia sends him money, which was being transferred through an account belonging to a Ugandan he didn't reveal. Apart from food, administrators, utilities, and the matron, the expense of running the hostel was minimal. The girls cooked for themselves in groups of about 3 to 4, with each group cooking per day. On Saturdays, they would have meat for supper. When it was midday, the hostel would be on fire during food serving. Many girls would want to have 2 plates. Others would fight, quarrel with cooks, alleging that they were served bones or little. One day, one of the girls collapsed in the evening hours. She was carried to Tuba Medical Center and the nurse said it was hunger. Most of the girls were swallowing family planning pills, but still, some got pregnant. Ahmed said he was baffled that in the December 22nd batch that left for Saudi Arabia, about 4 of the girls were found pregnant during the pre-departure medical. But it is said that the recruitment company loses money when a girl who is already cleared fails a test because replacement takes years. By the time one does that medical, we were told the visa, air ticket and COVID-19 PCR tests are all ready. That medical is always done in less than 5 days before the travel date, except for COVID, which is done a day before traveling. So, it is said that Rosette forced them to do abortion and the center was bribed to test again. In less than a week after abortion, the girls traveled. But on arrival in Saudi, the same tests were done and to their surprise, they tested positive for pregnancy and were deported. The science there was confusing. Ahmed was not amused. He threatened to expel whoever was seen with men around Kulambiro. He brought new guards at the gate, yet it was the guards who were doing the impregnating. In the next group that traveled on January 3rd, 3 girls were again found pregnant on pre-departure medical. They all came from Richard, the same agent who had brought me to the hostel. Rumor came that Ahmed has asked Richard to withdraw his girls because he was tired of making losses. Meanwhile, the Arab boss Ahmed was not refunding the 400,000 shillings he had taken from the girls for the botched mega deal. In November, girls who had paid stormed his office demanding for a refund. Leira and Gloria, the Ugandan administrators for the Arab owners, refused the girls to see him. Majid, the other Arab working for Ahmed, came out shouting in Arabic, things girls did not understand, but which certainly seemed to be abuses. With gestures, he ordered the girls out of the office premises. The girls refused to budge and shouted back demanding respect. Faisal, a young security man guarding the office, was called and ordered to throw them out. He instead started pleading with them to leave or he would lose his job. Because of Faisal, the girls agreed and left. The girls then started mobilizing for a demonstration, but Ahmed learnt about it and brought in new security guards who also locked the gate. This infuriated the girls into spontaneous violence. Raging with fury, they attacked the guards and even broke down the gate. They then proceeded to Ahmed's office in the previous hostel building and demanded their money back or the truth about their travel. Majid threatened to call police and the girls dared him to. He even tried to hit one of the girls and the angry team threatened to lynch him if he tried it. Then he said he would disqualify the ringleaders from their visa processes, but it didn't help. It was Ahmed who showed up and calmed down the situation. He got out papers and read out names of those who had got visas. But our undercover journalist later learned that the list was fake. In the next episode, we bring you suspicious job, fake documents and virtual slavery. After waiting for 8 months in a restricted hostel, our undercover journalist was finally cleared to go for a pre-travel training instituted by the ministry. In the last episode, she narrated the frustrating experiences in the restricted hostel where they suffered poor hygiene conditions and food supply, which led to sacking of the matron and guard. Today, she continues with what happened at the training for the final journey to Saudi Arabia. Our undercover journalist found many other groups of girls from other companies. Others were in classes learning. Uncommonly, every girl was in a hijab or sharia, long dresses or skirts and sagging, their heads veiled. It was a school or institution of sorts. It was a large place, encircled by a perimeter wall, with a training hall, dormitories, offices and other buildings. There were so many girls from other companies like Atlas Recruitment Company, Explorer Dubai Limited, Escom Link Limited, Skynet, Bukedde International Limited, Al Fijairaha International. On arrival, the girls were gathered in a classroom for briefing by the college staff, a dark-skinned, tall gentleman. Our journalist later discovered was Solomon Akankwasa. She started being scared because someone she knew would identify her. She pulled her face mask to cover most of her face. Suddenly, Akankwasa fixed his eyes on her, saying that he knew her. Anyway, while briefing the girl, he gave them expectations while in the college. He told them that the dress code was the key and those who were not in hijab must get one. He said the heads must be veiled between 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. while on training. The college prepares the girls to get used to the dress code. He also asked them to behave in a civil manner and be considerate of each other's tribes, religions, and appearances. He said regardless of their differences, they were united by one mission: to go to Saudi Arabia and earn 1 million shillings in exchange of their labor. The college canteen asked the girls to buy hijab at 8,000 shillings. It must be either white or black. Aisha, the company operator from Zion, asked us to pay 3,000 shillings each and the company would contribute 5,000 shillings. To the girls' disappointment, she never bought for them hijab at the canteen. She went to a window market and bought old and unironed hijabs, smelling like used clothes. It was a residential training. Sleeping quarters were behind the main hall that hosted the training, and each of the girls were asked to get a colleague to share a bed with. The dormitory had double-decker beds, each bed with 2 occupants. There was not enough space in corridors and girls would quarrel as they pulled beds apart in order to pass. Each bed had a mattress, so what was required was a bedsheet, blanket or duvet. In the second shift, 35 more girls from Zion were brought in, and later at night, more 100 plus. A stranger girl asked to share a bed with our undercover journalist, and they slept differently, one facing in the head and another the foot, to avoid facial contact. In spite of what Akankwasa had preached to the girls, there was no way they could achieve harmony with so many girls gathered together in one place. They were like co-wives together in one place. Lots of envy, mockery, bullying, fights, gossips, and discrimination. The syllabus contained the bulk of useless stuff, but some measure of useful ones too. Classes were only 3 per day, and the 2 permanent teachers were Solomon Akankwasa and Boaz Amporeire. What our undercover journalists found useless was like being taught how to behave while in homes, maintain hygiene, respect bosses, and also dress unveiling heads. Those were simple things you wouldn't expect in training. Most of it were rules that governed kadama. Kadama is an Arabic word for maid or house girl. The girls were going to Saudi Arabia to be kadamas, so they taught them how not to use a phone, not to eat or sleep before their bosses. The functional, useful information was how to open saving diaspora accounts, presented by one Jacob, who came from Centenary Bank. In fact, after his talk, girls opened up accounts with Centenary Bank, paying 10,000 shillings for account opening. Trainer Dennis Kanabi, who said he was a hotelier, taught the girls proper way to do laundry, good personal hygiene, and how to prepare good food. They were also taught how to operate appliances like washing machine, blender, oven, and using a rice cooker. Najib Yusufu taught the girls what happens in Saudi Arabia, the Arab culture, their social behavior, dress code, feeding, leisure, and differences between there and Uganda. He also warned them to expect such challenges as language barrier, less sleep, homesickness, risk of body part theft, and different weather. Other challenges, he said, would be racism, different feeding, harsh bosses, insults, overworking, sexual harassment, hostile forces. But whatever happens, Yusuf asked the girls not to poke nose into their employers' businesses or gossip about the family. He also taught them basic words in Arabic like greetings, how to say cup, water, food, I am sick, man, woman, child, etc. In the next episode, our undercover journalist narrates her flight to Saudi Arabia. In the last episode, our Vision Group journalist narrated pre-travel training to Saudi Arabia. In this episode, she continues with what happened when she tried to get an express passport to travel. She started this process of traveling to Saudi Arabia in August 2021. She was assured that the travel would be in a matter of days, but 8 months later, she was with 200 other girls, patiently waiting for the opportunity. They were housed in a hostel in Tuba, Kulambiro, where as many girls were brought in as those who were leaving to go to Saudi Arabia. Some girls would leave for Saudi Arabia. Their bosses would come and read the names of the girls selected to go. For those like our undercover journalist, whose names were not yet read, had to wait for infinity, hoping and praying for an opportunity in the next batch. She was chosen for the pre-travel training instituted by the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development. The training is supposed to groom the girls who are traveling for house girl work in what to expect, Arab etiquette, courtesy, how to use home appliances, and how to save or remit money to Uganda from Saudi Arabia, and so much more. They completed it at Labour College of East Africa, Namwongo campus on Bukasa Road. It was supposed to take 2 weeks, but their recruitment company, Zion, withdrew them after 1 week. They were then told to return home to prepare for our flights to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. She asked Rosette, their Zion supervisor, whether ministry wouldn't know that they cheated and blocked them at the airport, and she laughed. Apparently, the owners of the training institution also work in the ministry. On March 17th, management at the college asked them to sign out that training was done. They signed out and waited for Zion management to pick them. Aisha came the following day on 18th and asked them to contribute 5,000 shillings each for transport back to Zion offices in Kulambiro. They paid and were transported in 8 taxis. When they got to the office, their bosses told them to go home for a week, because if they were found at the premises, the company would land into problems. Pre-departure orientation was supposed to be conducted for a period of not less than 14 days, according to the regulations, and a recruitment agency must deploy its domestic worker within the period of 30 days after the training. Also, the approval is submitted by the training institution to the ministry for approvals at least 7 days before the pre-departure orientation is conducted. The regulation further explains that ministry has the right to suspend accreditation of a pre-departure training of the institution if the institution does not conduct orientation for a period of 14 days. And if the institution submits false documents to the ministry or fails to submit to the ministry a schedule of the training to be conducted, its recruitment license would be revoked. The list Zion submitted to the training institution had 261 names, including those who joined them after they had started. They were told that the college would still have to wait for the 2 weeks before they submitted their certificates to the ministry for approval. On April 4th, she got a call from Zion saying she had been cleared and approved. She was therefore to report to the hostel at once. But she was also supposed to go through HIV, pregnancy, and hepatitis B tests before she would be admitted back to the hostel to wait for her visa. The Gulf Cooperation Council medical examination, which she had done in August last year, had expired and she needed to do another. All migrant workers traveling to work in the 6 Gulf countries of Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates needed a GCC medical. The girls called each other and discovered there were many who had been called. They were all excited until they arrived at the office in Kulambiro. Shamim, one of the office administrators, told her that the company wanted to deal with those who have a valid GCC medical first. Those whose medical certificates had expired had to wait. That was a freezing shot. On return to the hostel, Zion conducted a medical exam for pregnancy and HIV. A nurse took their samples and they had to wait for about 30 minutes before they got their results from Ferras. On May 4th, she was called back to the hostel and told that her visa was ready. But her passport was the old machine-readable one. She didn't have the e-passport. She was asked to pay $250,000 to be helped with a new passport. There were 15 girls who needed new passports. The scaring thing was that her visa was issued on April 24th and would expire 3 months from the date of issue. On May 16th, she was assured that the passport books were out of stock, but that she could get an emergency one at a cost. The man they gave her to get for her through was Kenneth Ikinyom, who claimed to be working with the Ministry of Internal Affairs. He asked her to pay 650,000 shillings and he would get her the book in just 1 day. He took her through the process to show how he had no big share of the required 650,000 shillings because he had to reverse her application from Mbarara, where Zion had posted it, to Kampala. The next day, Kenneth changed the story. He said he was not able to pick the passport. He asked her to go to Chambogo and a man called Ojara would give it to her. On May 18th, while in the waiting area in Chambogo, Kenneth sent her Ojara's phone number contact as 0773 05 8828. She called Ojara and he told her to wait for the message. He said he had no powers to pick it for her. She was mad. She told him all the false promises she had gone through and insisted Kenneth had said Ojara would give her the passport from Chambogo. Ojara just replied that if she wanted the passport from Kampala, she had to write to the Commissioner Immigration of the Ministry of Internal Affairs first. In the next episode, our undercover journalist narrates her meeting with Internal Affairs Minister Kahinda Otafire. In the last episode, our Vision Group undercover journalist narrated the difficulties she went through to renew her passport, and today she dares to meet the Minister of Internal Affairs, General Kahinda Otafire. She got a visa to travel to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for work on April 28th, and she had to use it before July 28th. Zion assured her they would get her a new passport, but by May 16th, she was being told the passport books were out of stock. She was introduced to Kenneth Ikinyom, who claimed to be working with Ministry of Internal Affairs, who claimed that he would get her a book in just one day. He asked her to pay 650,000 shillings, which she did. But the best he could was to send her to Mbarara, where Zion had lodged her application. Kenneth promised to pick her passport from Kyambogo, where he said they were being printed, but he failed and asked her to wait for a message from immigration before traveling to Mbarara again to pick the book. When she demanded to refund her money, he handed her over to Ojara to get her the passport. Ojara instead said the only person who would help her pick the passport from Kampala was the Minister of Internal Affairs. In anger, she called the Minister of Internal Affairs. It is none other than General Kahinda Otafire. The minister asked her to meet him in his office in 20 minutes. She jumped on a boda from Kyambogo to Internal Affairs, and she was surprised at what a jolly and receptive man he was. She requested him for an authorization to pick her passport from Kampala, since she had done her interview in Mbarara. And he didn't ask any question about what she had gone through and why she needed the passport. He only asked if she was secure. He only asked if she was sure the passport was at Kyambogo. He just reached out for a book and wrote a cheat, which he gave her to take to Passport Control Office. On the cheat, he was directing that she picks the passport in Kampala. Why does the world fear General Kahinda Otafire? Tears of joy flowed down her cheeks, and she didn't even wipe them off. She took the cheat to Kyambogo and called Ojara. She told him she had been with the minister and she had his message from him. He hurriedly asked her to meet him on counter number 1. He looked at the cheat from General Otafire and asked her to take it to the back of the ministry in room 17 and 18. When she presented the magic cheat in both rooms, she was informed with an apology that her passport was not yet printed, yet Kenneth had claimed it was. She was, however, asked to move back to Kyambogo the following day at 10 a.m. to pick it. The next day, as directed, she was at Kyambogo. Ojara was working on counter number 1 on emergency passports, but this time he asked her to find him on counter number 5. Unfortunately, her passport was still at the ministry. He asked her to sign for it and move to the ministry with one of the staff to pick it. And she got it. The new sky blue passport was in her hands. To be accepted back at the hostel, she had to go through medical checkup again at her cost of 50,000 shillings. She tried to protest, and Feraz, one of the girl's Arab bosses, threatened to cancel her travel arrangements. She paid, and her pregnancy and HIV tests were negative. She was then given a cheat to be allowed in the hostel. The girls were divided into 4 groups, which they said were according to the recruitment companies. Reed, the owner of Zion in Saudi Arabia, would receive them and distribute them to those 4 companies. The companies were Reed Muhammad, Al Salman, where she belonged, Aleka, Sami, and JALD Human Resource Center. Each company was supposed to pick its domestic workers from our group at the airport. On May 26th, she was given an air ticket for Egypt Air. The travel date was May 28th, and the boarding time was 4:20 a.m. There were 8 girls from the hostel, but traveling in 3 different groups. There were 5 for Al Salman, 2 for Aleka, and 1 for Sami. Ferraz brought them 3 different t-shirts as uniforms they would use for traveling. They briefed them that while they were going to travel together, they would be received by these different companies on arrival. Al Salman, Aleka, and Sami companies were based in Saudi Arabia. Aleka girls had to wear veils. They were given t-shirts. Ahmed emphasized that if one is caught at the airport, she was supposed to suffer alone and not to expose others. He asked all to pretend not to know each other once they arrived at Entebbe. Once they arrived at Entebbe airport, so that in case one person is intercepted, the whole group is not affected. When they reached the desk, the lady asked for CPR results. The fake papers showed her PCR was done at Middle East KT Group Laboratories on Bukoto Chisasi Road. She stamped on it. At the entrance, she presented her passport, but her bag in the baggage scanner went to the walk-through, and presto, she was inside. They lined up at the Egypt Air check-in counter for boarding passes. From here, they proceeded to immigration. A lady came to them and instructed them to only line up for the specific gentleman who was in counter 3 from the left. They did not get any hard time because almost everyone who worked on them seemed to have been briefed. There was another group of girls from another company who were lining in another counter. In fact, there were many other girls from other recruitment companies like Absolute Labor International, Greener Pastures, Tusano, and Al Faizo. After waiting for about an hour, the girls boarded Egypt Air, flight number MS-838, and that is how they left Uganda. In the next episode, she narrates the real challenges which began in Saudi Arabia. In the episode, our undercover journalist narrated how she flew out of Uganda to Saudi Arabia. Tonight, she narrates her flight and arrival in Riyadh. Two things made her uncomfortable throughout their movement from the hostel in Tuba Kulambiro to the airport and finally out of the country. One was the fake documents they were given. They had COVID-19 PCR test results, which they did not do. COVID-19 vaccine card books, which they also did not take. The second discomfort was the expected embarrassment, as almost all the girls had never used an airplane before. About an hour after checking in, they boarded Egypt Air, flight number MS-838. First of all, the excitement and the noise started as the girls ran towards the plane and struggled for seats. They tried to explain that the struggling for seats doesn't help because each one had her own seat number, but they could not listen. Others blatantly refused to leave the seats they had grabbed, and the air hostesses tried and failed to redirect them. They just gave up. The good thing was that the plane was dominated by girls going for Cheyo, over 150, with other girls from Absolute Labour International, Greener Pastures, Tusano, and Al Faizo. Only 6 people were private travelers. So, the embarrassment stopped at the plane staff and the 6 passengers. In one case, an Egyptian air hostess was trying to shift one of the girls from where she had sat to her proper seat, but the girl didn't know what the problem was and didn't leave enough English and didn't have enough English to be edified. Girls were not complying to any instructions. They were shouting when the safety instructions were played. They remained on WhatsApp when an order to switch off internet was given, and some were standing to have a better view when the plane was airlifting. It was a night flight, and so there wasn't much to see below. So her colleagues chose to break into song praising God for the final breakthrough. One girl started it, and soon the plane was like a high school bus or school truck. When the food came, some asked for spoons, not seeing the plastic cutlery wrapped in the serviettes. Even removing the retractable tables was a problem. She was surprised that none of them were broken in the process. Some girls even asked for more food. They arrived in Cairo at 9 a.m. and new excitement of a big international airport started. There were lots of selfies with airport escalators, adverts, hanging lights, and whatever was new to the girls. Every girl who successfully perched on the moving steps was cheered like she had scored a goal. Those who failed and struggled to get off attracted more noise. Airport staff tried to direct the girls to the stairs. Instead. Other travelers must have been wondering where we were coming from. They arrived in Riyadh around 3 p.m. on May 29th. The flight is generally over a desert, and all you can see down is brown and sand. Even up to King Khalid International Airport in Riyadh, there isn't much to see except the desert. Riyadh is Saudi Arabia's capital and main financial hub. It is located on a desert plateau. In the center of the country, there were as many agents at the exit of the airport as there were groups on the flights. They identified them by the names on our t-shirts or hijabs for those whose recruitment companies had insisted. The man who was supposed to receive them identified them easily. He gestured to them to step on the side, and his greeting was, "Give me your passport." He collected them according to their respective companies, Al Salman, Aleka, and Sami. Surprisingly, he gave the Al Salma passports to our undercover journalist to hold. The ones for Sami and Aleka he gave to another agent. He then told them to wait because there were other girls who were delayed in the airport belonging to 2 companies, Tusano and Uganda Limited. When they arrived, he handed them over to another man who had them all in a vehicle driven by a man who they later found out was Muhammad. Muhammad was a welcoming man, jovial and humorous. He asked them how to say "I love you" in Luganda. He was always wearing a smile. About 40 minutes after they left the airport, they entered Riyadh. Riyadh itself is an amorphous expanse of neighborhood sand, subdivisions bounded by wide roads lined with commercial strip development. There is no impression of desert in the city center, which had more green and flowers than Kampala. Riyadh is the capital and largest city of Saudi Arabia. It is one of the largest cities in Arabian Peninsula and is situated in the center of the Nafud Desert. Mohammed stopped at Tusano offices where the girls belonging to the recruitment company got off. They continued to Al Salman offices, which were a distance out of the city. They reached Al Salman offices at about 5:30. According to her Google Maps, the area is known as Al Malka. It is in a large settlement area with several storied apartments covering the whole place. The settlement has a nicely paved ground, green grass, compound patches. Their apartment was one 3-storied building. The ground floor had the office on the left and on the right, rooms for girls. In those rooms were Filipinos, Bangladesh, Sri Lankans and Indians. They were about 15 in number. They were given a separate room as new arrivals, all Ugandans. They were told that their employers had rejected them and now they were waiting to be resold. In the next episode, our undercover journalist narrates the beginning of her troubles in Saudi Arabia. In the last episode, our undercover journalist narrated her journey and arrival in Riyadh, the capital city of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Today she continues with her fall from the frying pan into the fire. They arrived in Riyadh on May 29th and were picked by a one Muhammad, who took them to Al Malka, where the Al Salman office was. This was the Saudi company that was supposed to hand them over to their employers, who had paid and were waiting for them. This place is where new girls belonging to Al Salman arrived. Then the employers who paid for them pick and take them away. But if the employer finds you incompetent, inadequate, slow, or just fails to like you, he or she returns you to the place and picks another one, who was returned or orders for a fresh one from Uganda. Pickups for girls who had been rejected at their previous places of employment were much fewer, as Arabs preferred new girls from abroad. That same evening, one of the girls was picked by her employer. 1 hour, another girl was picked, and they remained 3 among the just arrived. They stayed on the first floor adjacent to the office, close to the Filipinos, Indians, Bangladesh, and surprisingly, they all discriminated against Ugandans because of their skin color. They didn't want to share anything with them, yet they were all in Saudi to look for jobs as housemaids. There was a Ugandan lady called Doreen who stayed around the apartment on the second floor. The building had 3 floors, but they were not allowed to access everywhere. The girls only went to the 3rd floor to eat because that was where the kitchen and dining room were. Doreen stayed around the apartment doing casual jobs. She knew Arabic and was the one helping them get around, translate for them, and thus became a link between Africans and our Arab bosses. She was overseeing and caretaking Ugandans like our de facto representative. She worked alongside a lady called Gladys from Kenya, who stayed on the 3rd floor. At the hostel, the girls depended much on rice and eggplants, while Philippines used to contribute and cook their own meat or fish. Each room occupants would be called out to the dining table on the 3rd floor and eat alone. Eating was at a high speed so that the group leaves to give way to another group. Doreen told them that there were some other Ugandans in room 4, 5 and 6 upstairs, who they were not allowed to meet. The whole place, they were told, belonged to Muhammad, but he assigned each nationality to its apartment. Another room had about 2 girls who were mentally ill as a result of depression and would get treatment while waiting for return tickets. There was also an incident where 2 girls escaped from one of the offices to an unknown destination. That was why Muhammad ordered the entrance door to remain locked all the time. Each girl keeps her own passport, so those who want could escape. She was assured that her boss would pick her anytime, because by the time she left Uganda, she was fully paid for. The 3 girls they found at the hostel narrated to them their experiences with Saudi bosses, and she thought they were exaggerating the difficulties to justify their failure to keep their jobs. Otherwise, more than 200 girls were brought in by Al Salman Company. How come only 3 had failed? On the 3rd day, she couldn't keep waiting anymore. She went to the office and confronted one of the staff about what was happening. They told her they were going to find out and let her know. That very evening, Gladys, the Kenyan girl who was helpful at the office, came with her passport and told her she was needed in office. Excitedly, she trooped down thinking her employer had come to pick her. She found Muhammad, the director of Al Salman Company, waiting for her. He gave her to an old man to take her somewhere. The old man asked her to carry her luggage to the car and told her to sit behind on the side of the driver's seat. She wondered why all the specifics unless he wanted to keep monitoring her throughout his driving mirror. He drove a long distance. In fact, long enough for me to conclude that he was her employer and was taking her to work. There was no conversation between them. She tried to say something, but the way he smiled back showed he never knew any English word. He actually tried to communicate with her, but used Arabic, which she couldn't understand. About 40 minutes later, they reached some place. It was already night, at around 7:30 p.m. The Arab who drove her to this place backed out some instructions and she was responding according to her gestures. She got her bag out. She followed him to a certain office. She could not read the name of the office since it was written in Arabic. There was a gentleman working on a computer and another old man whose seat seemed to show he was the owner of the office. The Indian boy, who must have been a messenger, kept entering and leaving. She noticed that he knew some English. There was another black girl who looked to be in a terrified mood. She had a small backpack. After waiting for about 4 hours, the office was about to close. The man who looked like a boss asked why she was not being worked on. Her passport was again taken out. Unlike the others, she was not given that document. The messenger was directed to take her somewhere instead. In the next episode, our undercover journalist shows you how the undercover worked. Our undercover journalist finally left Uganda for Riyadh, the capital city of Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. This was the epic of the project she began in August when she recruited herself into labor externalization to experience firsthand what Ugandan girls were going through. After a generally smooth arrival, the frustrations of waiting for an employer who wasn't coming resumed. In the last episode, she narrated how she was picked for work and ended up at the office instead of a home as she had been promised. In this episode, she continues with her first clash with the system. They arrived in Riyadh on May 29th and were housed at Al Malka, where the Al Salman office was. 3 days later, her employer wasn't forthcoming. All the girls she was with in the same company were picked except her. Her turn came last, but not by an employer as had happened to her colleagues. It was Muhammad, the director of our company, who handed her to a driver to take her. She was sure he was taking her to work, but when they stopped at the venue, he said, "Yalla Maktab," which means "come to office." And indeed, she was brought into an office whose details she could not read because words were in Arabic. There, she met a Kenyan who had also just arrived. She was left there till the workers concluded their day's work to go home and close the office. She was then led to a store in the next building. Meanwhile, she was starving. She hadn't eaten since morning. She gestured to the man who was taking her to the next building that she needed something to eat. As sleep was taking them into slumberland, at around midnight, another Indian man came and asked all the girls to pick their baggage and leave. When he returned to lead them to the new mystery destination, he told our journalist to stay because her case was different. The rest left. She remained with 3 Indians. She was suffocating with mystery. There was Wi-Fi, so she used the chance to communicate with her supervisors at the New Vision. About 10 minutes later, a man who introduced himself as George, not real name, working in the Employment Services Department at Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, called our journalist. He asked for her personal details, names, the company that took her, and the passport number. The next day at 11 a.m., the man who had driven her to this place came to her. She later found out he was a driver of the company. He asked her to pack her bags again, handed back her passport, and they left. When she tried checking on live location, it was Al Mohammed on Al Kaj Road, still in Riyadh. He drove her to Muhammad's house. They found he had just woken up. He angrily asked her why she had refused to go to the employer's house. As the conversation went on, Muhammad flew into rage. He put her on IMO video and ordered her to talk to Ahmed in Uganda. Ahmed was in the company of Fatima. She started by refuting the allegations that she refused to travel to Daman. But apparently, that was no longer the issue. Fatima asked her to explain how she knew George from the Ministry of Labour. It then dawned on her that the ministry had contacted them after the man she talked to confronted them. She told her she did not know any George. She only lodged a complaint at the ministry when she left her life, when she felt her life was in danger. She refused to believe it. She furiously demanded to know how journalists knew him and how she got his contact. She was talking non-stop, and so she left her to ramble on. She even referred to the passport our journalist got so easily when the whole country could not access them. She said they had tried all ways, using mobile money, mobile contacts, but failed to get passports for her fellow girls. She said they had tried all ways using money and contacts, but failed to get the passports for the fellow girls, who she left home. How come she succeeded in just 2 days? She also recalled that she had failed to explain to them how she got the passport. Or to tell the others, "You are a spy, a green snake in the grass." Who are you reporting to? Who is your commander? What have you told them about us? How much do you know about us? Fatima wrathfully asked our journalist. She also threatened that if she did not explain herself, she could not blame anyone for whatever would happen to her. That too was scary. Arabs are not known to be compassionate. She had read about them. Their 1,400 years of invading, killing, enslaving, persecuting and terrorizing others. Who doesn't know about their slave trade in Africa? And the slavery still happening in the Arab world, reported often on social media by our own sisters. Who doesn't know about the way our fellow journalists, Jamal Khashoggi, was killed in 2018? She texted George on the number she had used to talk to him and also told him how she was being threatened. He asked who in particular, and she said Fatima and Ahmed. He asked her to record the evidence of these threats. She told him she could not. He said he had approached Zion over her earlier allegations and they told him she was lying. In the next episode, our journalist got into trouble over spying. In the last episode, our undercover journalist narrated how she was accused of faults she was not aware of, and her breaking point coming when she was declared a spy. In this episode, she continues with how she grappled with the spy label. Her life in Riyadh started off on a bad note and seemed to deteriorate into the worse. When they arrived at the girl's boss Muhammad's office, the rest were picked by their employers except her. When they fetched her from the office to go and work, they just dumped her in the room, where she starved for hours on end. Later, they accused her of refusing to travel to Daman, where her employer was waiting for her. In the process of moving from the unknown to the abyss, she appealed to help from her workplace. Her supervisor linked her to an official from the Ministry of Gender, who put her recruiting company at task. They in turn accused her of being a spy of government, and Muhammad vowed to deal with her. The next day, two men came in the house with tools she suspected to be a sword or a panga. When they headed in her direction, she took off as other members of the family tried to restrain her from leaving. She ran outside the gate and kept on moving until she met some men who helped her locate Al Fujaraha hostel. But when Muhammad called the employer, he was told the girl suddenly ran mad. That she saw two men came in to repair an electricity problem and took off. The family told Muhammad that they no longer wanted the girl and that they would send her personal effects to the office. She had left her passport and personal effects with her employer. Muhammad said he was patient enough to give every domestic worker 3 chances, and when a girl failed in 3 homes, she would get deported back to Uganda. She asked for Wi-Fi so she could connect to her people in Uganda. He instead connected her to his data and left the room, saying she could interact with Ugandans while he attended to other people. She couldn't call New Vision or Ministry because she feared he would trace the people she talked to using his data. She got scared that Muhammad and his people could have tracked her calls. How much of her mission were they aware of? Maybe he was playing mind games of intimidation. He tapped on her shoulder and advised her to play her cards very well. He then left her and started pacing from left to right. At 7 p.m., Muhammad asked one of the staff to drive her to a destination she couldn't tell. She actually thought she was being taken to either airport or the police. They moved without saying a word. About 40 minutes later, they arrived at a certain place with isolated buildings. The driver asked her to move out with her bag because we had reached their destination. She looked around to see if there was any sign of police station, but there wasn't any. She asked where they were taking her, and he said it was a hotel. The building actually looked like a hotel, but there was no signpost to show, which was unusual. There was a security officer manning the entrance, and the electronic checks were intricate. The driver told her to stand somewhere as he checked her in. He took her documents and took about 5 minutes talking to the security men. She thought of running away, but quickly shot down the idea and the possibility. She also thought of returning to the car and drive off because it was a keyless starter. The driver returned and told her he had finished. She should proceed. She refused to enter. He grabbed her shoulder and forced her in. She tried to resist, but he was stronger. He pushed her inside. She hadn't experienced this kind of violence from any Saudi since she arrived in Riyadh. Inside the first room was a lady. She told her that she was under arrest. She ordered her to sit and face the camera for a picture. She again asked her to face left, then right, and took the different photograph angles. The Arab she went with started signing some papers. She was ordered to stay seated there and not to move an inch. Within about 30 minutes, she saw Muhammad come in with a sinister smile. But he looked very irritated and had folded his kanzu sleeves. He was also given some papers to sign on. She asked him what was happening, where she was, and why she was there. He only responded, "Young lady, you are no longer my business. I have nothing to do with you anymore. This is your new home." In the next episode, our undercover journalist narrates how she was locked up from the world. In the last episode, our undercover journalist narrated how her recruitment bosses accused her of being a spy and handed her over to authorities for deportation. Today, she narrates where she was detained and the life in the deportation center. After Mohad, the director of Al Salman, interrogated her, he got so sure she was a spy. Apparently, he had done his own research and found out that she was getting in touch with our gender ministry officials. He decided to hand her over to Saudi officials in a detention center. The official who received her ordered that she follow her into the corridor. When they entered, she found girls of all races. There were many Africans, Indians, Philippines, Sri Lankans, and Bangladesh, among others. She was taken to the section with Africans, where she found many Ugandans speaking Luganda, Lunyankore, and Kiswahili. But still, no one was willing to converse with her. Everyone there seemed unbothered by the other. Everyone there seemed unbothered by the other and was concentrating on her phone. She asked if anyone knew the name of the place, and the girls first showed her attitude. But later, one revealed that it was a Sakan detention and deportation center. It is situated in a former hotel that was now used for the short-term detention of unauthorized immigrants, refugees, and people awaiting deportation. She had read a scaring report by the Human Rights Watch on the deportation centers in Saudi Arabia. The report alleged ill treatment, overcrowding, torture and death. It said the majority in the centers in Riyadh were mostly hosting Ethiopian and South Asian migrant workers who claimed they were being kept in cramped and sanitary rooms with hundreds of other migrants who had been there for over a year. 6 of 9 interviewees told Human Rights Watch that they had witnessed guards beating workers so severely they were taken from the detention room and did not return. One migrant said he witnessed the immediate death of 2 detainees from their injuries, and a third died 2 hours later. But the place didn't look that bad. It was so clean, with many organized and good-looking apartments. She found out that second deportation facility was new, having started on April 4th, 2021. All the girls there wanted was to return home at whatever cost. They regretted the fact that there was no corruption to bribe your way out. All you needed are travel documents and a return ticket. Without these, even bribing Ugandan embassy officials to speed up your file wasn't helpful. Girls alleged that some of their colleagues used the embassy to speed up their process. Many girls had resigned to fate to wait for what would happen next, but still, you would see them crying on phone, either sending distress pictures to speed up fundraising for their return back home, or after seeing pictures of children from the Ugandans they would be chatting with. Everyone seemed miserable. There is no work, no money, and people at home were expecting money from their mother, daughter, sister, or friend. Not all could be told she was in a deportation center. However, Ugandan girls in the deportation center claimed that our embassy is very slow in solving exit problems. However, she was told a team of Ugandan officials from the embassy visited second facility on the evening of June 1st. They said they wanted to find out the plight of Ugandan migrants in detention and record their complaints. Girls opened up on their troubles and were told that government was going to do all it could to help them.
Bwetubeera wano batusasuza esente batujja mukubo abamu kufe batusula ku makubo bwe batusula ku makubo ne batuteeka ku poliisi bwe batuteeka ku poliisi tezatuyamba.
But all that only raised their hopes in vain, because there seemed to be no follow-up. In fact, when she left the facility, she was asked to look for a one Aisha Ahmad, who was the one recording their testimonies, to brief her about the developments. On June 7th, some Ugandans, led by 2 vocal girls, staged a demonstration over the delay of their exit papers. They accused the system of taking too long and keeping them in detention and loss of freedom. Joyce, not her real names, went from villa to villa asking Ugandans to join them, arguing that when Ugandans demonstrated in the past, there was action, and because of this, about 30 girls were quickly issued with exit papers. The plan was to reject supper as a way of showing dissatisfaction before gathering at the swimming pool with placards and start the demonstration. Most of the girls refused to join them, fearing the consequences. That night, those of us who hadn't registered for the demonstration had our supper as usual. The remaining food of what was delivered to the Uganda villas was packed in Zubala, garbage containers, and dumped on the second deportation center office. The demonstration took about 2 hours to calm down after staff agreed to talk to some striking girls' representatives. They told the striking Ugandans that they were going to put pressure on those working on their papers. The other nationalities looked on as Ugandans rioted and did not join. But the following day, the Indians rioted too. They were more violent. It must be remembered that the Indians are the cheapest maids in the Saudi market. According to Riyadh's post on his Twitter account on May 28th, Saudis pay $4,000 200 Saudi riyals. That's about 4.2 million Uganda shillings for an Indian worker, while for Ugandans, it is 11,500 riyals. That's about 11.5 million shillings. Kenyans go for 13,000 riyals. That's about 13 million shillings. And Bangladeshi go for 16,400 Saudi riyals. That's about 16.4 million shillings. And Sri Lanka go for 24,750 riyals. That's about 24.7 million. Even in salary, Bangladesh, Philippines, Sri Lankans are better paid. The Indians gathered stones and smashed window and door glasses, including those for the main office. The Arab administrators ran inside and hid. Management had to bring an Indian who was working at Sakan to calm her fellow countrymen, countrywomen down. Minutes after, the glass panels that were smashed were replaced. That same evening, they were given new instructions. Any group which rioted again would be faced with force. The standing order actually mentioned that they would be beaten and killed. It worked. Nobody rioted again. In the last episode, our undercover journalist shall narrate how she was evacuated back to Uganda. The New Vision played a surprise visit to Ahmed in Tuba, Kulambiro, but were denied entrance by the administrators who claimed he was not around. The next day, on June 8th, early in the morning, she found a forwarded message bearing a return ticket on her phone from Ahmed. At 10 a.m. on June 9th, she was told to go to the office at the deportation center to do a PCR COVID-19 test. There were 2 female guards at the entrance. Thereafter, she was told the driver was coming to pick her and take her to the airport. The Bangladeshi driver told her there was a lady at the airport who was waiting for her to take her through the immigration and exit process. But when they arrived at the Khalid International Airport, she wasn't anywhere. And she wasn't picking her phone. After some time, she suggested to the driver that she check herself in, and he hesitated. He said his orders were to ensure that he ensures that she is checked in before he leaves the airport. He did want to risk her escaping to return to Riyadh. When officially she was being deported, they checked in at 2 p.m. Again, the flight also had many girls returning home from Saudi Arabia. They must have been former shagalas. Her hope and prayer, she arrived in Uganda on June 10th, after 12 days in Saudi Arabia. A New Vision vehicle was waiting to take her home. She knelt down and left her tears to flow. She prays that someone out there reading this story learns from her experience. If this story stops any malpractice, even if it is an act that violates a migrant worker's human rights or any exploitation of the fellow human being in pursuit of profit and wealth, my efforts will not be in vain. All illegal and unethical practices in the process of externalizing labor must be condemned and remedial action be taken. If this expose is ignored, the country will have sacrificed its citizens into slavery in exchange for the 3 trillion remittances per year. The externalization of labor is now a lucrative industry. There is no reason why we can't protect the people in the trenches. This calls for action beyond documents and surface scrutiny in pursuit of bribes. It calls for understanding that the person you are ignoring to be exploited has parents, children, relatives, and above all is a Ugandan like you. Today it is her. Tomorrow it may be your relative, child, or even you. Her expose may not cause a sudden rapturous change because she is not the first to uncover this evil in the Saudi labor export. Several complaints have been raised and little is done, but any stone thrown in the name of awareness is a welcome effort.